these communities that have strong manufacturing cores are vibrant, because that industry is leading to so much economic activity in the area. And it's not just a one company, it's an ecosystem.
To have a great manufacturing ecosystem, you need a great support network. Mike Johnson and the Nebraska Chamber are a critical piece of that puzzle. In this conversation, we're going to talk about why manufacturing in Nebraska is on the rise and how the Chamber is helping manufacturers accomplish that. Mike, I know we don't have, beer in these glasses,
It's
but
a different
cheers.
kind of brew. Yeah,
Welcome
okay,
back
cheers.
to the show. It's been a
It's a little
couple
early
years.
for a beer.
But now you've done a late afternoon beer edition. We're doing a coffee edition first thing in the morning to get fired up, and you're kind of the closer in our Made Here series where we've been touring across Nebraska.
Great.
And I feel like you're an appropriate person to help us tie it all together. We'll riff on what we've seen on the tour, what you're doing to help manufacturers here at the Chamber. But first, you've been on Manufacturing Happy Hour before, and this was about close to 2.5 years ago now.
Yeah.
And it would have been at an event at the community college in Columbus, Nebraska.
Yeah.
Focused on really getting more folks in the community involved in manufacturing. Renson House put that on. And when we did a podcast, one of the themes, not surprisingly so, was that manufacturing has a perception issue. That was the case in Nebraska. That's really the case everywhere still.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, now that you've been in your role here at the Chamber for really close to 3 years when this podcast comes out, how have you seen that perception change during that time?
It's a really good question. Thank you. And that was a great event. We've actually done that event now every May since that first iteration when we met 2.5 years ago. I'd love to take all the credit for it, but I can't really. I think that there's really a resurgence of the manufacturing industry nationwide. We're seeing it talked about in national newspapers. We've seen a couple Wall Street Journal articles talking about Gen Z and them kind of gravitating back toward trades as career options. We're seeing, whether exacerbated by the pandemic, I think the supply chain crunch that came out of the pandemic was partly a driver among many other macroeconomic factors, but there's a re-domestication of manufacturing into the U.S. Not just automotive, but really all industries in manufacturing are seeing a growth and a re-domestication of making more stuff in the United States. Nebraska is playing in that space as well. We're seeing the industry grow.
Yeah.
And I think it's across, like I said, across all subsets of the manufacturing industry. But it's really something that's happened nationwide. So on the image issue, so there's kind of an economic growth aspect and the image piece. Objectively, you can say that there's economic growth there. Subjectively, I'm just seeing I'm hearing a lot more conversation about, that's pro-manufacturing. I'm hearing a lot more young people interested in it as a career. There have been a number of, like I said, published articles, whether it's The Economist or Wall Street Journal or any other news outlet. You start to see more positive news about the really great careers and lives that can be made with a career in manufacturing. So I'd love to take all the credit for it and give you half of it for our podcast that we did a couple, 2.5 years ago. But I think there's just a lot of really cool macroeconomic factors that are driving growth in the industry. And I think that the brand of manufacturing, when we spoke last, we talked about dark and dirty and dangerous, and it's kind of this, maybe pre-World War II type of work that, people think of when they think of manufacturing. And I think because of a lot of these articles and, if I can champion what the Chamber in Nebraska and chambers across the country are doing, I think there's just a lot of good partnership that's opening up what the world of manufacturing actually looks like for young people and for parents, and it's not as intimidating as it used to be. So,
Yeah.
if I can kind of color that in with those comments, since we last talked, there's been a lot of just positive, objective economic growth for the industry that's driven by a lot of different factors. But there's also a really cool, like, if the industry used to have a, you know, I wish I would have brought the meme, like, the manufacturing, like, no.
Yeah.
Like,
The
oh,
Drake
yeah,
meme.
actually,
Yeah,
that's a really
I
cool,
gotcha.
the Drake meme of acceptability as the industry sector for a career. I think that has really been the thing that I've seen over the last 2 years or so.
I mean, I like that you answered that both objectively, that yes, we've seen concrete evidence in the economic growth, but also you answered it, I'm not going to say subjectively, you talked about the vibe.
Yeah,
as
vibe,
well.
yeah.
And that's actually what we're going to be talking about quite a bit because,
Cool.
The team I'm with and I have been spending the past few days traveling across really central Nebraska to explore manufacturing here. And one of my observations, I'll share more about this in a second, I feel like central Nebraska, rural Nebraska, whatever we want to call it, is really writing a playbook on how to reinvigorate manufacturing in your region. And if I look at that, I'm going to share my thoughts in a second. Yeah. You see this way more often than I do. Do you feel that's a fair assessment, and how do you see that play out?
Confirm, yes. I think that is true. And central Nebraska is really cool when we talk about manufacturing because while Omaha and Lincoln have the largest number of manufacturers, there's just sort of a population math play at work there.
Sure.
But when you look at the fraction of employment and fraction of economic activity, actually central Nebraska is really manufacturing heavy. I haven't broken it down into what exactly a subsector that looks like. But there's a lot of, as you mentioned, Nebraska kind of has this foundation of an ag economy. We grow a lot of corn. We raise a lot of beef. We're actually the largest beef producer in the U.S. A lot of hog farming. Well, there's manufacturing processing that marries up to that. And you see a lot of that in central Nebraska, whether it's ag manufacturing like processing of corn or beef or pork or other agricultural products, or the support industries like things that companies that make combines or make silo equipment or make other ag industrial type of equipment. So there's really a great relationship. There's a word I'm looking for, coordination or symbiotic relationship between ag and manufacturing. And I think you see that in central Nebraska particularly. That's sort of big picture, what's the industry look like. Your comment about central Nebraska and maybe vibe, I think the businesses in central Nebraska are probably most acutely dealing with the workforce crunch than the larger cities of Nebraska are seeing. It's really,
that makes sense,
because the fraction of the size of the manufacturing sector in central Nebraska, and the birth rate issues, the population, which is a nationwide thing. It's happening in Nebraska, not as badly, but we're seeing a population decline. And I think that the manufacturers in central Nebraska, out of kind of need, are really doing a great job at developing. And this isn't to say that Omaha and Lincoln and western Nebraska aren't doing it.
Sure.
But to the point of central Nebraska, manufacturers, community colleges, high schools, they're really starting to create their own hyper-local ecosystems around what is workforce development, what does skill training look like. And I think that those manufacturers and those education centers are just doing a really great job that, one, the manufacturers kind of come at it from we've got to find workforce to keep our operations running. The educational centers are entering into this with, we need to find a great way to train the next, train these young people who are coming through high school and coming through community college, and how are they going to land into a great career, and et cetera, et cetera. The economic developers are coming at it from we want to keep these young people here, and if they're getting these great skills, how can we keep them in our local community or in our state,
Mm-hmm.
so that we all flourish together. And I think that these, and I use the term hyper local. At the state, when I look at like full state, yeah, fan the flames. Let's build these relationships. I can't dictate what a relationship should look like or should work on in one municipality or county versus another, just because the relationships are different,
Yeah.
the jobs are different, et cetera, et cetera. And so, what I think some of the best practices around relationship building are, you mentioned Norfolk, Nebraska.
Yep.
There's a really passionate group of manufacturers and community college people and high school, and they're like recognizing that there's so much positive opportunity there in Norfolk, and so
Yeah.
they're creating a routine meetup. Hastings, Nebraska has an already working routine collaboration between industry, education, and it's just kind of one of these things where it's not complicated, but it's always hard to bring stakeholders together. And I think the best practice is once a month, high school, community college, industry leaders get together, they have a beer, and they just talk about how's it working, how's it going. And out of those conversations come maybe a program for a high school tour or a new class that the community college could offer.
Yeah.
And I mean, I hate to say it's almost sounds a little silly, but sometimes it's not rocket science. It's simply getting together with your local community stakeholders and just having a chat about what's working, what's not working in the community.
I agree. It feels like in central Nebraska, you really have like a squad or squads of people that are really dedicated to advancing manufacturing, making it a career more people can pursue, making it a reason that people want to stay in those towns to contribute to that economy. I do think part of it, because I was going to ask you, like, what's unique about how manufacturers work together in like rural and central Nebraska. I think you just nailed it right there. And just other things that you also talked about how it was like out of necessity as well. Like that's not where people are flocking towards. So they've gotten creative. Some things that I've seen other places do that I think Nebraska's doing well is they're not stuck in the past. They have safety objectives, quality objectives, and technology objectives, and they're implementing those. And I think you made some great points just around that necessity. They do things more actively and creatively, and follow the trends and take action on the trends more so than I've seen in other spots. For example, like Mick over at Balin, he's a teacher. He teaches a fluid power class. Like, what a great way to expose people to your business as well. The other thing I see, the first time I came to Columbus, Nebraska, the first event I went to was the local chapter of Women in Manufacturing hosting a breakfast. So I knew right from the start there was a lot of involvement from women in the industry, and them as well as male allies saying, hey, we need more women in industry. You and Scott Volk talked about that on the podcast.
Yeah, we did. And actually, moving forward from having talked about that and your experience with Women in Manufacturing Breakfast, you see it in the data too. So we at the Chamber, we have a 501c3, we call it our Nebraska Chamber Foundation. And this was actually something that the Chamber launched after you and I met. And the idea behind that was let's do some nonpartisan, third-party, non-biased research to just kind of tell the truth about economic development in Nebraska, et cetera, et cetera. And so we did 3 studies. One of them was a manufacturing competitiveness study for Nebraska. And in that study, it showcased the trend line of women working in the manufacturing industry in Nebraska and nationwide. And it's really encouraging. I think to our point about the vibe, the industry is becoming more attractive for anybody to work in, regardless of your background or what you look like or where you came from, et cetera. And so you can really come into the industry from any background, and it's really cool to see the growth in women in manufacturing. This is trades related, but there's a young woman at Metro Community College in Omaha.
Okay.
She's a slight gal. She's a young gal, and she has this great story that she tells about being a 16-year-old kind of walking down her street, and she sees a guy who's got his garage door up, and he's like welding. I don't know if it was an automobile or arch or something. He's doing some heavy welding in his garage, and she just like walks up and says, "I want to learn more about that." Well, long story short, she gets into it, turns it into a career. She goes to the community college. She's a welder, and now she's instructing in the community college.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really neat to see a young woman go through that because of, we talked about the dark, dirty, dangerous and the image and et cetera. And I think it's really important for young women to see that I can do this.
Yeah.
And I don't have to, be an offensive lineman, big dude to be able to do this type of work. I can, whether we like it or not, it always helps to have somebody who you can look up to.
Yep.
And so I just want to celebrate all those folks who are doing that around the state. We've seen some examples, and that's just one.
Well, I mean, just to add some more examples, my observations from walking through these manufacturing plants were there were women leading the company. There were also women that were leaders on the shop floor, the front line. Like I saw, that's the thing that strikes me the most, right? It's like there are women out here that are literally doing all of the different roles inside of manufacturing. And, we talk about that a lot. We talked about it in the last podcast as well. It's great to see that in practice.
Yeah, it is. And it's happening across the sub-industry sector. It's happening. And, the story I told is an anecdote. And, another one is, as you know, I hate to mention it, but you remember I used to work for Anheuser-Busch. You did too.
Yep.
And
we're St. Louis guys.
We're St. Louis guys. When I started my career in 2006 with Anheuser-Busch, all brewmasters at our domestic breweries were dudes. And by the time I got to my spot where I was an assistant brewmaster and in the St. Louis brewery, I looked around and I would do some like speaking events to sort of public facing events, and people would still have this image that, a brewmaster must be a dude. And I was really excited to answer their question or comment with half of the brewmasters at the North American breweries at Anheuser-Busch are female.
Yeah.
That's an anecdote, I recognize, but the sort of that vibe piece, that industry trend piece, it's happening. It's happening at all layers of manufacturing companies. And it's not, I think the thing is, it's not forced, it's organic. It's like genuinely, no matter who you are, where you come from, the manufacturing industry is a place where you can go, you can learn some skill, you can get good at something, you can upskill yourself, and before you know it, you can go anywhere you want in that organization. I truly believe that to my core. It doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, you can get into the manufacturing industry, learn some skill, do a good job, and rise to any level in the company. Manufacturing is just really cool that way.
Yeah, from the opportunities we saw it providing people to just the impact it's having on the towns that it's in, like how vibrant some of these communities are. There's an absolute connection between manufacturing and the vibrancy of a city.
Well, that's true. Before this chat today, I was thinking about, at some point the multiplier factor for manufacturing is going to come up. And I need to do some more research on this and like which industry sector has the highest multiplier. But in prior research, I've seen that it's manufacturing. And so that point about manufacturing in a community and the community vibrancy, it makes sense. Manufacturing industry has the largest, I believe this is true, I actually need to look it up, such a large multiplier factor that every dollar that's spent on manufacturing in a local town actually multilies by 3 or something.
Yep, no, that's true.
And it
I don't know
down.
the exact stat.
Yeah, I don't
what
either.
What you're saying is
I have
exactly,
to look that up.
Yeah, it's very true.
But that objective fact that manufacturing has this really high multiplier factor I think galvanizes the point that you made about these communities that have strong manufacturing cores are vibrant because that industry is leading to so much economic activity in the area. And it's not just a one company, it's an ecosystem. It's a manufacturing company usually brings another manufacturing partner. And then you have some other companies that support the manufacturing industry in the area. And you have people who move in, and they raise families and their kids go to the local school and then they shop downtown and it's really this neat spinning up of a local economy that I think manufacturing does better than any other industry. I say that part gut and I say that part data, but I need to get maybe some more data to galvanize the point a little.
I'll look it up and add it to the outro.
Yeah,
I'll get the exact numbers there.
The Manufacturing Institute with National Association of Manufacturers in DC, they usually have a lot of good research on this, so I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, we'll get the exact stat on that multiplier
there you go.
factor. But last question to wrap things up. You know, you're here at the Chamber. I'd love to hear, there are going to be manufacturers listening to this everywhere. I've mentioned this a couple times. Can you give like a concrete example of how the Chamber has helped manufacturers and the people in manufacturing here in the state of Nebraska, and then your advice to engaging, you know, your local chamber as well, particularly for not all chambers are created equal. You do a very good job here.
Thank you.
Be mindful of the ones I'd say that maybe aren't as active as you are.
I know I'm going to miss something in answering your question. You know, one, what I think chambers do really well for manufacturers, this is a little bit of a generic answer, nationwide answer, no matter where you're at, not just Nebraska. Just yesterday, I was talking to a manufacturer, and they're talking about economic development, they're talking about growth and partnerships and et cetera, et cetera. The Chamber of Commerce, and I think of it from a state chamber perspective, statewide association, that is the conduit for manufacturers of any shape and size across a state to convene and partner on what is the voice of this industry in this state need right now. What have we done? I think we've used that conduit here at the Chamber. We've got a really, I'll call it revitalized manufacturing policy council here at the Chamber. We have very hearty discussions with really important stakeholders from across the state in manufacturing to help drive policy conversations. You know, as a manufacturer, former manufacturer, engineer, I'm accustomed to, you come up with you identify the problem, you come up with a solution, and you execute it. Policy's not that way. You don't just get to dictate how you want the world to work.
Right.
But I know that every manufacturer has I wish this was happening to help me get better in my local community, whether it's workforce development, state support and economic development, or whatever the case might be. We've used that conduit to help drive the conversation. And one point particularly I want to stick on is the event that you and I first met at a community college. The purpose of that event is let's get manufacturers and community partners together and let's focus on automating manufacturing facilities. We talked a lot about workforce here in this chat already. Workforce and the gap that exists in workforce is a solution to productivity. Unemployment's low across the country. Unemployment is crazy low in Nebraska. Automation is a solution to unlock productivity with an existing workforce. And in fact, when it's done, when automation investments are made, generally the company that's implementing the automation either makes higher quality stuff or more stuff. And the people who are working there usually get higher skill because now they're learning how to work with the automation that's been installed because the company is making higher quality and usually it's an and more stuff. The employees that work there are able to command a higher wage. They're doing less of the back-breaking, maybe bending and twisting and lifting kind of work, and they're doing more value-added work. And so it's kind of automation investments are kind of a tide that lifts all boats. And so we've used this, I'll back us up to the chamber comment.
Okay.
We've used this chamber network as a conduit to help drive that conversation around what can we as a state of Nebraska do to help companies do a better job of automating. We're still trying to...
Great focus.
Yeah, we're still trying to crack that nut, from a state policy standpoint, exactly what does that look like? Conversationally, the Department of Economic Development in Nebraska has really been entering the chat on, the needs of manufacturers to solve the workforce issue, and Department of Economic Development has been really supportive in let's crack the nut, let's solve the issue on how can we have manufacturers in Nebraska automate. I think the state departments are starting to see that when manufacturers automate, they make more stuff. More stuff that's made means higher wages are paid to people, higher multipliers than hitting the local communities. And so the state can see higher tax revenues, and then in the future, lower tax rates. It's sort of like I said, a tide that lifts all boats. And to be talking about automation as a solution to those things is really cool. And I think that all the way back to your first question, this vibe, this feel, there's so much more conversation about that now than there was just 2 years ago.
Yeah. No, it's I've been impressed with the work you've done. I still follow it. I see your updates, and I continue to look at Nebraska as an interesting model for, not interesting is the wrong word, but just a good model for what other manufacturers should be doing to make it part of their community, drive change, get more people involved in the industry, get more people to move to the state to do it.
Yeah.
All the above. You do
true.
a lot of great work. So.
Well, thank you. And, it'd be a shame if I didn't mention just a couple things.
Sure.
You asked about, or you made the point that manufacturers are going to be listening to this, other folks are going to be listening to this, and they're not all going to be in Nebraska, of course. What can they do? And I remember when you and I talked 2.5 years ago, made the point that there's probably a manufacturing association in your state. There is.
Yes.
I know there is.
Yep.
And it's
it's just how active they are in a lot of ways.
How active they are. And, I'll tell you that every state has a manufacturing association group. And if they're not very active, it probably needs you.
Yeah.
It probably needs you. And I think that that's what we've found in Nebraska. It's not like Mike Johnson starts working at the chamber and then Mike Johnson starts doing stuff. That's not the case at all.
Yeah.
It's really that the chamber just started really leaning into the manufacturers who are most participative. And before we know it, that passion ignites and it becomes a thing. And I think that's what we're finding in Nebraska. There are, and I've been at conferences over the last month with my partners across the country who do this very type of thing. And there are some incredible organizations across the country that are that conduit for manufacturers, whether it's a state's chamber of commerce and or a state's manufacturing association. We in Nebraska, we're one organization. In some states, they're separate organizations, but anyone who's looking for that conduit, it exists in your state. They probably need you.
Yeah.
I think that's what we found in Nebraska, is that the industry really stepped up and decided it's time to lead.
Yeah.
That's what they've decided.
Well, we've met a lot of manufacturers this week that are rising to the occasion, not just with inside the walls of the four walls of their own factory, but within the community and within the state as well. So thank you for